We're going to do our panel discussion now. I think Bill Leaf is going to join us from Wisconsin DOT, and Mohammed and Nat are going to come back up here. So first, and I will be as fast as I can. I'm not as fast as I look, but we need to do some questions from the audience. Has anybody got any questions? Please raise your hand. Questions for the presenters, whether it was Mohammed, Nathaniel, or Dave, or Aaron. Show of hands, some questions.
My first question is for Mohammed. He showed three scenarios, scenarios 2 and 3. I'm just curious, what was the rationale for picking the numbers from 60 to 62 from scenarios 2 to 3? Was it based on the cost or the funding available?
No, actually, I didn't define. I didn't put any constraint on budget, so I wanted just to show that how. You know, always based on your decision trees, and there is a maximum level. Even though you have unlimited budget, you cannot get 100% in good condition because of the definition or threshold that you define in your decision tree. So that was actually the maximum tangible good condition that I could get based on the decision trees. So that was just try and error. So the target was just defining one proactive and one more proactive. So I had many scenarios, but just picked 3 of them and compared them. But the trend was the same. So for example, when I compared the 50% good and 60% good, that in this case, 50% good is proactive and 60% is more proactive. 60% showed even better, better than 50%.
Something I've been thinking about, I don't have any answers. I've been kind of talking to people and dealing with it for the last few years, but, and that would be in the subject of performance, the upper bound of performance. And a lot of this is lower bound where you're improving things in that, but the situation, and I'm sure we'll all get there eventually, but when you reach your target, then what? You know, as far as limiting or budget that, or redistributing budget. And that's kind of part of the thing. When you're dealing with people, you know, the programs are fine, but when you get to that point of saying, well, we don't want you to spend any more money, there, people can come up with a zillion answers why, oh, we need to spend that money. So I'm just kind of projecting ahead to say, okay, once we get to that performance level, now what?
I'm Dave Jutton of Michigan DOT, and I can volunteer to answer that because I've been very happy in that we had a 20-year performance measure of achieving 95% of our bridges good or fair, and we reached it this last year. So maybe that, so the question is, okay, you got there, you had a budget to get there, and now you need to maintain. And unfortunately, there's so many different things that always come up. With us, we started learning that our bridges are getting hit a lot, and even though we reached our objective of being 95% good or fair, we're still somewhat reactionary because of the details of taking care of beam ends and things like that. Plus, there's so many needs. We have a measure for reducing our scour critical bridges by 5% each year. And so we actually, we do continue to forecast, and now even though that our measure is to maintain, you would think that, okay, there takes more money to get there, but then you should be able to reduce your money a little bit and then maintain. But unfortunately for us, that we're going to go above that goal a little bit, but then inflation is catching up with us, so we're going to drop, So I haven't seen a real lot of difference between, the money needed to reach a goal and the money needed to maintain a goal.
So just getting we're going to start our general panel discussion now, and we have some time to talk, so we can just have an open discussion. But Aaron, what have been some of your biggest challenges with the TAM?
So our biggest challenge by far is we don't have one person whose job is asset management. And we've also had about a 30% decrease in the amount of people who are in our branch. So everyone's doing their job plus someone else's, plus maybe half of another person's. So I got asked to be the bridge expert person for our TAMP. And while I've got a PCA on Metric 18, which I'm responsible for, I've had to maintain to make sure that we meet that PCA along with doing our TAMP. So our biggest problem by far has been it's someone else's other duties as assigned.
Yeah, I think the big challenge in talking with people in our organization is integrating the different business areas. So we've got pavements in there and other structures and assets, and they have different tools and strategies also. You know, we're real fortunate with bridges in that we've got, you know, because of our inspection programs that all of us have, you know, we've got some very detailed, good information, but some of the other business areas and their assets are just coming up to speed on some of that. So to suddenly mesh each into a consistent and coherent a document that covers the spectrum is a little bit challenging.
Well, as I mentioned, for us, I think it's, going to deck area, and then it's a subset of the NHS. So, you know, we're managing all our bridges, but then we have to do this extra activity just for the NHS. Yeah, that's what I can think of.
Yeah, that's similar for North Carolina. We've been communicating one set of measures, and we've gotten good at it. Now we have another set of measures, and I think they're complementary. They're not contradictive or contradictive. It's just a new way to communicate goals. How about Mr. Cole and Nathaniel here, from a federal highway perspective, what's been your guys' biggest challenges with TAM?
Well, I think for the plan, what was been communicated to me was, just over the past couple of years, people were curious, we don't know what's going to be expected in this plan. So that was kind of, and now that's been demystified. So, but then there's still this kind of regulatory discussion. So it's still kind of like, well, what does that mean? So kind of making the plain English of these regulations and things like that. And I know for me, when I was the asset management program manager in Maryland, as I went into each of the different modes, you had some people who wanted to leverage this to buy a $10 million payment management system, or some people wanted to go out and measure every track of the light rail. So it's kind of like, you can go overboard on these things, but there needs to be the right level of look at the system and then incorporating that into what you're trying to do. So, not trying to be overly reactive.
Boy, that's a good point about not going too far right away, to understanding, getting the data you need to start, and then maybe adding on to that as you can verify the data you have. That's a really good point that we probably all learned along the way. Just moving on to the next question here. Just kind of, with all of us, I think Dave mentioned the times now with BMS, but we all kind of find ourselves at different places in the system. I know North Carolina is definitely not at the advanced state, but and I'll start with Dave. Just where do you place yourself with your asset management system?
Yeah, and that's a real good segue into the BMS National Working Group tomorrow that you'll want to see, because the purpose is of that group, of course, is take away the intimidation, and we've split it up into basic, intermediate, and advanced. And though we've been doing it a long time, a lot of our analysis has been network level using the NBI, and so I consider that somewhere between basic and intermediate. And we're climbing that pyramid, and to me, I consider advanced being that you're doing project level, prioritization, optimization, risk assessment, and we're not there yet. So I would say that we're at intermediate, and we're working to get to advanced.
Yeah, I would like to place us at intermediate, hopefully heading towards advanced someday. It is without question quite a difference in how we do business with asset management plans. In the past, I guess we would consider ourselves fortunate to understand what our current needs really were and what those current priorities are. But the real trick in doing all of this is to understand what the future will be, not only as far as setting what those performance objectives will be, but understanding how the variation in funding streams and things of that nature is going to affect it.
I think Kentucky, of course, is kind of at the basic level, but I don't necessarily think that maybe reflects poorly on us, because with BMS just getting up and going, we haven't had these years of this is how we do things. And so now we can, whenever we're starting to put all of this information in BRM, we can make sure that we put the right things in from the very beginning. And so then we don't have to go back and change the way that we've kind of done things. So.
Just to add, on, one of the great things about this partnership and this group with this question is it really gets you some comfort in some ways, because I know we're probably in that basic to intermediate rulemaking. You know what these systems can do, and you kind of feel a lot of pressure, and maybe you're not getting everything you could out, and we're not. But it's a lot of comfort to know that I don't know anybody in the country who would say, man, we're at advanced right now, and we're doing project level prioritization. We're spitting out projects that are exactly what our field guys would recommend in the field. It's a journey to there, and we're all getting there together.
I think the most important thing is defining what you want and performance measures for that, and quality data, working with universities, research firms to develop your performance plan, performance models, deterioration models, and see based on your situation, come up with the data. If the softwares are just tools, and you need to have a quality data and quality models to predict the condition and coming up with a better or more effective plan. So instead of, I think that in asset management, we can call that reactive and proactive and predictive approach. So to be better predictive, you need better models.
Getting started, I think the best thing we ever did was set goals. I think every bridge engineer in this room knows intuitively what your needs are for your bridges, but you might not have a goal. You might not have a measure to get to that. For us, having that goal kept us focused for many years. And then if you have a goal and you have a measure, okay, that's going to depend on some type of data form. So as Muhammad said, I agree, you have to have quality data to be able to then start working to it. But yeah, I think a goal is a perfect starting point.
I guess from Wisconsin, we would, recommend don't try to tackle it all at once. What we did was kind of chunk it out. And as Dave alluded to, goals are a really good place to start, and with our preservation policy for bridges, they kind of lay that out. But, and I had presented on this a little bit yesterday, but, what I hope was illustrated in that presentation is just how we kind of built it modularly in chunks and progressively towards being able to, take on asset management.
I would suggest don't start from scratch. You have 49 other states that maybe they've already defined their actions and benefits. Talk to them and see what they do and use that as your starting point. I know that's what we did.
Yeah, just from my experience, and when I was implementing an asset management system in Maryland, I think the first thing that I learned was I sent a couple guys we were using that, I think IBM bought it. It was called Maximo at the time. It was a maintenance management system where we were customizing. So send a couple guys to be behind the scenes guys, because I felt like we had to be able to drive our own software. Every time we wanted to change a field or change an algorithm, we didn't want to have to get a PR through our process. We wanted to be able to go and do what we needed to do. So we set up these contracts where we were able to go behind the scenes without crashing the software or violating some warranty for the software. So you need to be able to drive your own software. So from the beginning, start with the thought that you will be able to technically go behind the scenes and change things and make it do what you want it to do. And the second thing was that what I'd like to do, I like to run the software with some old data and look at the recommendations, the outputs and things like that, and then look at exactly what we did like 5 years ago, run that data. And then what did we do and what did the software recommend I do? What were the cost requirements and what was the difference between the two? So that way you can gauge, how much refinement you need to do on the system, do all that wave fitting, once you calibrating your deterioration modeling and everything like that. So those are the main two recommendations that I would think.
This next one's really just with the state agencies up here, but I know in North Carolina, we're reporting our TAMP measures, but we're not managing to those NHPP performance measures. So just to kind of talk, and I'll start with Dave, are you managing to the new NHPP performance measures, or are you reporting those and kind of managing to some state measures?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of how to answer it because we are managing to, we have long-standing performance measures, and it's to bridges each, freeway, non-freeway, and that's our top priority. And so again, the NHS is a subset, and it's by deck area. So we're checking to make sure that one, we stay out of penalty. We don't go over 10%. And for us, it was a bit of a challenge, but it was the success and failure of it for us is one bridge, our I-75 over the Rouge River, which is 3% of our NHS deck area. So a good thing for us, we had a deck replacement project scheduled for it. We're managing towards our own state goals. The good thing is, other than deck area, it's not that different for us, and so we just have to do some checks. The whole target thing and doing the gap analysis, that's been an interesting challenge because we're reading the requirements of the rules and when we're in so-and-so penalty, and so we're trying to select very wisely what our targets are, so we don't go into penalty.
Yeah, as Dave alluded to, really the MAP 21 Fast Act performance measures are just something we report out to. We don't manage a network just on an NHS level. We manage, all of our roads in the state of Wisconsin, even our local roads to some extent. We control, monitor, and manage that. So it's very hard for us just to pick out the NHS and concentrate investment decisions on that. So we're fortunate in that, a byproduct is that it's in pretty good shape, the NHS. But our measures are to keep the state bridges in 95% good and fair condition, local bridges, 90% good and fair, and we're meeting that. But the most effective measures, is that a later statement? No,
That's the next one.
Yeah, I'll leave that alone.
Kentucky has always managed based on structurally deficient, which is now poor category. So that kind of we'll just continue to do that. But I know a presentation I listened to, I can't remember if it was yesterday or today, but you also need to set some good targets, because I think if you don't, then you're just always going to set yourself up for like a worst first mentality. So that's something that Kentucky have a meeting on Friday about, that sort of stuff. So
Nathaniel, just going to you, you had a really good slide up there where you talked about that these measures really are just for reporting out, and you were really recommending states pick the measures that work best for them. Do you want to kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, these are the targets. Well, the measures are for Federal Highway to be able to assess the condition of the nation and be able to comprehensively report to Congress the amount of funding that we need. So we need to be able to measure consistently across the country. So, as far as those measures are concerned, but the targets, which are based on the measures, so they're set by the state. So, if, like you said, if you're at the top, you've met your target, and now you're in a maintaining phase, or in the case, as I mentioned earlier, Washington State, their pavements were in like 98.9%, good condition, and they made a decision we don't need them to be 99% good. So they had these declining targets. You could have declining targets. And that might match some improving targets at your state. Might have state targets that are improving, but these declining targets in the national federal highway reporting system. So that's perfectly fine. I think the idea is that that you're able to communicate that, because that's the challenge, communicating to the public. Now, I was trying to remember the penalties for not making targets. I'm not sure what those penalties are for not making targets. Penalties for not having minimum, meaning the 10% structurally deficient. And and then the failure to make targets, there's some requirements that says that if you fail to make your target on certain parameters, then you must explain, and set up a plan on how you're going to meet those targets. But there's, in the regulations, you can have declining targets, and then, if you don't meet, if you say we're going to go to hell, and then you don't make it, you don't even make it to hell, you're below hell, then there's some problems there. But, so you can have, I think the question was, what do you do with the difference between the federal measures and targets and your state measures and targets? You have to manage for your program, and then you have to report the federal highway, and hopefully those match the national objectives, so.
Yeah, those are good points, and I really feel like Federal Highway's got a pretty good perspective on how we're going to implement this and enforce it. Really, really hopeful. We're going to have a good relationship here. In North Carolina, we've got commitments to our legislature on certain targets, and we can't, just because this come out, we can't change. However, we found a way, especially with the poor measure, to really make that complementary to our state targets. And we're working towards that, to find a way to do that for good. If we have a good target, it's a lot different, but we're trying to find ways to make them align to help them be complementary to each other, so everything's kind of going towards the same point in the future. What's your most effective performance measure in your agency, do you think?
Well, in the past, Kentucky has only had the one performance measure of just decreasing our structurally deficient bridges. And with this, we're in the middle of a budget session right now, and I don't know how many of you all follow Kentucky necessarily, but our governor just decided to veto our budget bill, and the session ends on Friday. So now we're all kind of like, well, what are we going to do? But with that budget bill, our road plan was, there's a big push from our governor to get rid of all of our structurally deficient bridges, which of course you might you might program them, and then the next year you're going to have structurally deficient bridges that are poor bridges that you didn't plan for. But I think by doing this, we'll set ourselves up for, okay, so we don't have as many bridges in poor category, so now we can really go for this preservation project that we really want to do. So we're kind of excited about that, and hopefully the legislator gets all together and we can have a budget on Friday.
Most effective performance measures, I would kind of recommend ones that relate directly to actionable items. And in our preservation policy for bridges, where we kind of began this whole journey, we outlined some real specific stuff. Obviously maintain bridges in good or fair condition, 95%, as well as the decks. But what I like about how we've approached it, and maybe we took some of this from all of you, but we get a little bit more granular as far as maintaining coated steel surfaces in condition state 2 or better. We were shooting for 90% of that. Maintain expansion joints in condition state 2 or better, 90% of that. Actually, we've modified that. And also maintain bearings in condition state 2 or better. 95% of the bearings is the goal there. And what I like about these is they will hopefully result in very identifiable bridges and work actions that we can program, undertake, that will then affect those performance results. So they're kind of granular, and they come out of our bridge preservation policy.
For us, our best performance measure is our good or fair, and we monitor it for freeway and non-freeway bridges, but it's got really great value to us because we're a state that's divided into regions. We have 7 regions, and so we have region bridge engineers managing their bridges in each of the 7 regions. And in our call for projects, they all get together, and we're tracking how they're doing. So we're not just tracking state for our freeway bridges, good or fair, and we are able to forecast 10 years out based upon their program. But we're able to track per each region, and per the number of bridges and the categories of preventive maintenance, rehab, replacement, they're actually allocated money. Well, why that's good is because we always seem to have one region that's the problem child, and we have that one region right now, and they're cheating. They're spending money on capacity improvement, and they keep doing it. Ever since they got a new person in charge there, they've been cheating, and their condition is tanking. And the other regions are have really taken notice because as their condition tanks, then they're getting more money. So if you cheat, you get more money. And so we've taken it to the highest level of our department and made them aware, and they're in the process of having talks with the problem child right now.
Actually, I want to talk about the performance measures, and most of the performance measures we're talking about is based on NBI, but now you're collecting NB element data. And the problem is the data collection for NBI and NBE are not consistent. It means that there is no correlation, or there is no good correlation between NB and NBI. When you're trying to set targets and use measures using both NB and NBI in a scenario, so the results are not reliable. So you need to come up with a correlation between those two. And actually, I checked many data, NBI and NBE. There is no such correlation. We should be very careful when we have a measure from NBE and NBI and using those two together.
Good points by everybody, and just in North Carolina, I saw Rick Nelson in here. I think he walked out, but in North Carolina, we established a definition for good before I went to our bridge maintenance unit, and it was really helpful. You mentioned establishing goals, Mohammed, earlier in a question, and starting off, and I remember going through a spreadsheet of about thousands of bridges that were in fair condition, looking at those. We got a bunch of money for preservation candidates. Having that measure and getting those general population of work candidates, it really got us really quick to identify bridges that we thought were like 5, 6, 6s that we think, hey, that's a great bridge to kind of go do something with that deck and get it up. And having those measures to do that really gave us going from 19,000 MBI structures of what to do to to reduce that population for engineers to look at. It was really helpful, and to kind of get yourself going, which bridges need work, which bridges don't. That's been good for us. Part of the reason to come to these presentations is to hear what's working from other states and learn from others. So I'm going to pick on some of y'all in the audience that I know a little bit about this question about which works well and which doesn't. I know a lot of y'all got different measures that work, so I'm just going to walk around and ask some people some questions here because none of y'all raised your hand. I'm going to just pick on you. I'm going to pick on Clayton here. Clayton and I have the same asset management system. So Clayton, do you have any measures that you think really works for you in delivering projects?
Well, I've been involved in working on the TAMP and developing that over the past 6 or 7 months. And we're going to meet the federal requirements for that. Our poor condition status that we have in the state right now for NHS bridges is at 1.08. We have all those bridges already programmed to be replaced down the road. We're not going to invest any more money out of a budget to try to bring those back up. One of the things that I did is I set a goal to move 49.1% of our bridges is where we're currently at in good state condition right now. We're going to try to move that to 63% inside the next 4 years. From that, we've been able to identify 453 bridges that have condition states of 776, and those are going to be what we're going to go attack first with preservation activities. The department has actually looked at using the TAMP to go across our whole, use that as what we're going to use across the whole board in the state of Georgia. So that's one of the goals that we got out of that.
Well, it's just a real good story. The TAMP, sometimes for a lot of us, seems like an extra burden, but you guys have found a way to make the TAMP something to really help your state.
Yeah, the only thing that we're really concerned about is by setting targets down the road, how is FHWA going to deal with the states if we don't hit our targets? And we've asked that question a number of times and haven't been able to get a really good answer yet from anybody.
We'll let Nat, if he wants to talk on that, I know we got to be careful, but.
In the regulation, it talks about not making targets. It talks about the consequences of not making targets. And the consequence is that you'll have to explain it away. So It's the wording in I mean, it's in plain English there. I mean, I'm just saying some other areas, it's challenged to figure out what they're trying to say. But that one, it's just you have to put together this plan to define how you will go about meeting your target in the future, or so like I said, in the process, you have the initial plan, initial report, mid-period performance report, and then the final report. At the mid-period performance report, if you notice that you're not going to meet your 4-year targets at the 2-year point, then you have the ability to change your target at that point. So there really shouldn't be many opportunities for you not to make a target. Of course, after that 2-year period between the 2 and the 4-year report, if there's a Hurricane Katrina and everything is shot because of that, then of course, here's the explanation why we didn't make our 4-year target, because between then and now, we had this catastrophic event. So I mean, the question is, what will we do if we don't make our targets? There's no penalty for not making targets. There's a requirement to provide a report or address why you didn't make it, so.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and our division office in North Carolina has been really good with us about kind of put us at ease. We're all nervous about it, and it's understandable. It's a new requirement, new restrictions. Some of our target setting is reflective of us probably just being nervous about the rule more than what we think the bridge is going to be. But I think it's an iterative process. We're just getting started, and it'll be cool to see where this is in the next few years. I think we'll all get into a groove here in the next few years.
Start talking about targets, and it's probably the most irritating conversations that I've had in the past 18 months. But I understand why FHWA or why the feds are not going to have any real consequences for not meeting your target. I would say that it's half a dozen one way and 6 the other, that we've had people that want to set targets above where we're at so that we can achieve something. It's a goal to achieve. And we've had the other 6 say that, oh, well, if there's no penalties, I mean, and we can just adjust our targets lower, then why don't we just do that? We can keep adjusting our targets lower from where we're at right now and manage our decline. And it's probably one of the most frustrating things. I understand both arguments, why the feds don't, if people want to set that goal so it's something to shoot for, it's something to achieve, they can't penalize that. If you want to have 90% in good and fair and you're sitting at 87, then that's something to achieve.
And I don't want to minimize the idea that we're setting comprehensive targets that we plan to achieve, something that we aspire to, because that's the objective, to have some North Star that we're trying to achieve. I think the problem is that, not just Federal Highway you have to answer to, but the public. So when, ASCE puts out their report card, they're going to say, they set this target and they didn't even meet it, and so the public perception, I just finished developing a guide to target setting, coordinating with local agencies on those target setting, because local agencies have to set targets too. Mm-hmm. And they are directly, they see their constituents, routinely at these community meetings. So they need to be able to say why they're not lowering the safety, reducing the number of deaths, why the bridges are being deteriorated, why you didn't meet your target. So I think it's more, there's an accountability application going on there, especially with the public. So there's, elected officials, they want to know, why didn't we meet the target? So, it's more than just, it's important to meet the target. It's important to set an achievable target. And it's important to have a reason why we didn't set those targets and to be able to articulate that in this communication, because these are going to be on public websites. So.
Well, and that's the thing, is that if you're at 73 now and you set your target at 70, that gives you 3% between now and 4 years in order to decline down to that. And then, well, we're at 70.3 right now. We'll just set our target at 68. And public perception is key. And calling things fracture critical or structurally deficient, the public doesn't understand that, but they sound really hairy terms. Sadly, I know it couldn't be structured this way, but if we could have had a requirement for 90% in good and poor condition, and then a limit of 5% in really, really poor condition, that's a better public perception, because as soon as the public sees that, wait a second, we've got 35% of our bridges in poor condition and 5% in really, really poor condition, that kickstarts something, right? But if the public sees that, 85% of our bridges, 95% of our bridges are in good and fair condition, that's fantastic. But we've got 7% in good, and we've got a huge band of fair right on the verge of going into poor. And they don't want to fund fair. I mean, things are fair, they're good, but they're just slightly less than good, and they really don't see that it's just above poor. And that's a from public perception, legislators, that's a tough chair to sit in, to say, yeah, we're maintaining 90% of our bridges in good and fair condition when you've got 65% in fair that are just about to nose over. So it's frustrating.
Dave, do you have any thoughts on the idea of setting lofty goals versus setting realistic goals with that whole conversation? I know we went through that in North Carolina.
Well, okay, there's goals that the department sets that we want to achieve. Is that what you're talking about, or are we talking about the federal targets?
I think we're talking about that conversation between the both of those.
Oh, okay. Well, I think every department should have their own goals. And for the entire system, it can't just be the NHS. I think it's the best thing you can do. I see what the FHWA is doing, and I applaud them. They're the ones requiring us to have a TAMP. They're encouraging us, or saying that we need to do risk-based asset management. They're saying we have to define, maintain a bridge in good or fair condition. And I think they've struck that balance, because that's why we're here talking about it. But I've worked for the state. I'm a state representative, and if feds come up with a rule, I'm going to figure out how to work it. So for the targets, we're setting them a little low. We're going to make sure we make them because we don't feel like having to explain ourselves to the FHWA. We're certainly managing over 10% structurally deficient, and I think that was an excellent decision by the FHWA to make everybody do that. The FHWA I see as being here to, raise the bar, and that's what they're doing for us.
Yeah, I mean, just with working with our division, I think they found a great balance with the TAMP and the measures as understanding, kind of going back to that basic, intermediate, advanced, even with the TAMP. They understand where we are now, and they're being really understanding, but they're keeping the bar up here, and they're not trying to get us there tomorrow, but I think they're not lowering the bar so that we can get there and just stop. And I really think it's been a great process with our division, and I hope, I'm sure it's different across the country, but we've had really good experience.
This is for all the state people. I'm a guy from history of various things, and one of the things that's happened over this last period of time with this TAM has been something that happened in the early or late 90s with the GASB 34 and your financial statement and the health of a transportation agency. My question to the state agencies are, has your accountants showed up at your door talking about GASB 34 and how it relates to your TAM?
I think the answer is no, and I can answer. As anybody in the room,
we don't like GASB 34. It doesn't work for bridges because it doesn't give a good value. It depreciates everything out too quickly. So we're showing it two ways. We're showing it like a replacement value, a future replacement value, and depreciate back based on our model. So it's been really interesting. It's a lot of fun with numbers, but it's the financial people. We gave them the data, and they're going to have to figure out how to use it. We're doing a future replacement value and then depreciating back, so it's interesting.
And Dan, if I may, a lot of people may not be familiar. GASB is sort of a asset management plan before there was a requirement for an asset management plan. And as discussed, there's two ways to to determine when companies do these financial statements at the end of the year and they put up these annual reports, a good test of how well an agency is managing or a company is managing their assets is to test how managing their program or making money is to test how efficiently they're managing their assets. So one of those tests in that GASB financial statement reporting that every state has to do has to talk about their owned assets like bridges and pavements and things like that. And they have to say whether or not they're investing money in those assets and retaining the value of it, or they're showing it as a decline and depreciating the value of it. So of course, in our asset management plan, we're doing this modified approach where we're showing that we're maintaining the value by doing this preservation and things like that. So, but the question was, have those accountants showed up? And there's an opportunity here because there's going to be some contrast between what those financial people are saying in these financial statements and this asset management plan. And sooner or later, they're going to have to come together.
Okay, well, I think we're getting close to lunch. Just one last time for Aaron, Bill, and Dave, and Mohammed, and Nathaniel. If we give them all a big round of applause. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. And I guess it's time for lunch.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.